Hey guys, Waterfowler41 here. It is a rainy Friday. I have the day off of work. Got my son set up with his homeschooling or remote learning. It is time to install some truck parts. Alright, so what are we looking at here today? Today we are going to be installing a set of lower rear control arms from a company called Core 4x4. Now if you haven't heard of them, they are kind of the bee's knees as far as control arms for Jeeps as well as Dodges. So what we have here is their set of fixed length lower control arms that I'm going to be installing on my 2020 Ram Rebel. So these are direct drop-in for the factory replacements. And the reason why you would upgrade the lower control arms as well as eventually the upper rear control arms is you want to basically tighten up everything. So if you look down in there, you have box control arms, so that's the lower one, and you have a very similar, albeit shorter length control arm at the top and the rear. But they're boxed, meaning it's just a piece of sheet metal that's boxed up and welded shut. Those will tend to flex if you throw a lot of power at it. So ultimately, again, when my warranty runs out, I'm going to be throwing a little bit more power at this bad boy. So what I wanted to do in the interim is prepare the rear end of the truck for when that time eventually comes. So you could get these in fixed length like I have, or you can get them in an adjustable length. So basically the adjustable length would look very similar to this, except at the end it's threaded and there's a threaded Johnny joint at the end. And the reason you'd want to do that is if you have a lifted truck. So try to explain some geometry here. So if you lift the truck, the control arms are going to have a tendency to pull the axle towards the forward or towards the front of the truck. So you obviously go up and then that axle is going to want to swing forward a little bit. So if you have a lifted application, one of the things you could do is swap out those control arms for adjustable ones, which will then give you the ability to push the axle back center with the wheel well and line up everything on the rear. So that's why you'd go with the adjustable ones. I'm not planning on lifting the rear end of the truck at all. If anything, I'm going to do a 2-inch level and just call it a day. I think the Rebel sits well as it is. I just wanted to beef up the rear end just a little bit, which is why I didn't want to get crazy and kind of protecting myself from my future self. So I went with the fixed ones. That way I don't have the option. And then in typical gearhead fashion, I'm not just getting kind of crazy and no holds bar in the rear with the engine and power and lift kits and whatnot. So what comes in the kit? So obviously you get the lower control arms, and you can get these in I think about 12 different colors. They will powder coat them for you. So I got them in red, obviously to complement the Ram Rebel. Their Rebel itself has a whole bunch of red accents, so I figure why not just go with red lower control arms. Plus this will match my differential cover pretty nicely. Then you also get some Zerk joints, some Zerk fittings, and these Zerk fittings will install on the bottom side of each of the sides on each bushing. So you got your Johnny joint bushing here. This is a welded Johnny joint bushing, and then you have your regular polyurethane one here. So you install the Zerk fittings there. That way later on down the road when you need to add more grease, you can just do it right through here instead of pulling everything apart. It's a maintenance thing, so it's awesome. It works out very well. You also get some other Zerk fittings that if you have the atypical style grease gun, the one with the needle, that's what you would use here. So you get plenty of those. I went ahead and installed those. You'll need an 8mm to install the Zerk fittings here. Then you obviously get the stickers because everyone knows stickers add horsepower. You get a couple of them here, so ultimately I think what the idea is you throw them on there once you get the control arm installed. So like I said, this is a direct drop-in for the factory control arms. So what you're going to need is 21 and 22mm tools. So I got a 21, 22mm wrench, as well as sockets, a breaker bar, and a torque wrench. Ultimately, anytime you're touching the suspension, you're going to want to torque that down. I believe the torque specs for these are 195 foot-pounds, so we'll go just shy of that. And we're going to be reusing the factory hardware. However, if you want, you could pick up, I think it's for an extra 15 bucks, you could pick up grade 8 hardware from Core 4x4 that will complement this stuff really well. And if you live in a salt belt like I do, grade 8 hardware actually does outlast most of the other hardware. So let's talk through the installation. The first thing we are going to do is gently take some of the tension off of the lower control arm by very gently using a jack to jack up from the differential and just raise it a little bit. You don't need to pull the wheels off of the ground a lot. Just actually, you don't need to pull the wheels off the ground at all. All you need to do is just lift the truck up a little bit so you pull some of the tension off that lower control arm. Then you go ahead and start unbolting the front and then the rear, and then it should drop right out. So the one thing that I've seen in some of the other installation videos is that axle, because it's in tension, and no matter how much you jack it up, it's still going to be in a little bit of tension, it's going to want to swing back. So after we get that control arm removed, we're going to double check and make sure that that control arm matches the exact length of the core 4x4 ones before we go to reinstall the core 4x4 ones. And then we are going to use a pry bar to help move that axle into its location so we can get the core 4x4 lined up properly and get everything bolted back up.
Super accessible. You got one right there, and then you got one in the rear that's just tucked behind the factory Bilsteins on my truck. So I guess I should have said that. I have the Bilsteins on this truck, not the air ride. So that's why you're going to need the wrench, because it's kind of a tight fit back there. So if you just sneak the 21mm wrench on that side and then 22mm socket on the other side to remove the nut, you should be in good shape. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and jack up just a little bit from the differential just to unload some of the tension here. And then we're going to do one at a time. So I'm going to swap out this side, get everything put back together, and then go over and do the passenger side. So let's get rocking and rolling with lifting it and getting this bolt broken off there.
Okay, so I have the lower control arm bolts loosened up. I'm not gonna lie, those put up quite a fight. I had to call in reinforcements to get them off, and I'm a bit winded now because of the amount of hammering I had to do. So we got everything loosened up. The good sign is the lower control arm is loose, so I can move it back and forth, which means we have literally no tension in this joint. So I'm going to keep that jack stand exactly where it's at and then pull this guy out, and hopefully we could get the core 4x4 one dropped right into place here without having to do anything with the jack. However, if we do need to move it, we'll just kind of play with it until we can get it to fit. Wow, I am winded. That back bolt was a pain. I couldn't get any leverage on that one. So I just slipped a 21mm wrench on that side, balanced it up against the bottom shock nut there. And then I lied earlier. Those are 24mm bolts, or 24mm nuts on the outside, or on the inboard side of these control arms. And then just went to town with it with a couple breaker bars and my giant hammer. Wasn't the best, but it is what it is. So now that everything's loosened up, let's go ahead and pull it all out and get everything swapped out for the core 4x4 bar. Let's do it. Okay, so I have the passenger side OEM lower control arm pulled out of the truck, and we're going to swap it out with the new core 4x4 one. So just to show you, these are the factory bolts. They drop right in there. Very close tolerances. Nice. And then if you want to double check the height or the length of these things, what you should do is take their OEM one, slip those in there like that, flip it over, and then you should be able to lay this guy down right on top. So there you go. What I see people try to do a lot is, let's see, I see people try to thread it on one and then push it on one and then lay it down on the other one. And what's going to happen is you want these the exact same length, and you're not going to be able to get the same length if you're trying to do that, because you're trying to basically pivot it off this point onto that screw. So you would stack them and then thread the screw through there instead of trying to thread the screw first and then stack them. All right, so let's go ahead and get this guy installed on the truck. I don't know if there's a proper orientation. However, every installation I've seen, the poly bushing is in the rear, and then the welded Johnny joint is in the front. Now here's a fun fact. See these little clips in here? This is a spring clip. When I used to work on go-karts, there's a lot of these on clutches, and they call them Jesus clips, because if you pinch them together with the pliers that you're supposed to use to pull them out, they always shoot off, and you go, oh Jesus, can't find it. Anyway, fun fact. So let's go ahead and get this guy thrown into the truck and reuse our stock hardware to get it installed. And like I said, when I pulled this guy out, it was loose, so I don't think I'm going to have any issues with popping this guy in there. So I'm going to be real careful, put in the rear, and then pivot up the front, and then we should be good to go.
All right, good news. So the control arm popped right in without having to modify or move the position of my my jack over there. So now that I got everything installed here, I got the bolts started through and I got the nuts on the other side. I'm just going to go ahead and tighten everything up. Like I said, 195 foot-pounds is what we're targeting here. So I'll go ahead and tighten everything up, torque it down, and then we will flip over to the other side. And I'm not even going to move the jack since it worked out real well on this side. It's likely to work out on the other side, and we can go ahead and get those swapped out. So let's go ahead and tighten these bad boys up. Remember, 21 on this side, 24mm on the other side, and basically tighten it down with about 1,000 Ugga Duggas, or 195 foot-pounds is what I've been seeing on the internet. So we're going to go with that because everyone knows everything on the internet is true. So let's do it.
Okay, so we are done, and before we look at the final product, I want to go over the tools that you need, because while this product is pretty straightforward, it's just basically removing 2 bolts on each side and 2 nuts. You got to get creative with how you loosen those up, because those things are really on there. So as far as sockets, you're going to need a 21mm socket and a 24mm socket. Then you're going to need an extension just in case this is too short for your tools. I used 2 ratcheting or 2 ratchets, 2 what is this, 1/2-inch ratchets here. You could get away with 1. It just made it easier with 2 once I got the bolt freed up. Now, as far as breaking the nuts free or breaking the bolts free, I highly suggest getting a bar like this that fits around the ratcheting ones. You can have a breaker bar. This breaker bar was just a little too short, and it wasn't giving me the right angles, particularly when I was trying to get the rear side undone. It was just a little too short. So what I ended up doing is slipping the ratcheting wrench inside this little bar, and then that not only gave me more leverage, but it also gave me the ratcheting thing. So I could just slowly go at it and loosen it up. You're going to need a 21mm wrench, and then also an adjustable, or if you don't have an adjustable, or if you're lucky enough to have a 24mm wrench, you're going to need the 24mm wrench, and I'll show you why in a second. Then on top of all this stuff, definitely have a dead blow hammer handy. This was helpful in loosening up the bolts on the driver's side. As far as the passenger sides where they put up a bigger fight, I used a big sledgehammer, and it was ugly, but it did the job. So like I said, here we have the factory control arms. These are box, so they're basically sheet metal that's folded and welded up. Lighter and hollow compared to the Core 4x4 ones. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Core 4x4s. So like I said, these are fixed. So you also have the option, if you want, to buy the adjustable ones if you have a lift kit. But in my application, the fixed ones work perfectly fine. So as far as process, the first thing I did was loosen up the front bolt. I kept everything together while I was loosening up the back. The bolt head here is 21. The nut on the other side is 24mm. So have those handy when you're doing that. And it was really easy. I just took a 21mm wrench and balanced it up on here, and that's how I got enough torque to loosen it up. But like I said, make sure you have breaker bars ready, because you're gonna need them. You're gonna need that leverage. These bolts are on there like there's no tomorrow. So we have these guys swapped out. Went ahead and did the rears end. So let's go ahead to the other side, and I'll show you where you need to have a 24mm wrench, because it gets a little bit difficult on that side. Okay, we are on the driver's side now, so you get pretty clear access just like you did in the rear to the rear of the lower control arm. However, the front is a little bit difficult, and the reason it's difficult is because you have this big skid plate in the way and the gas tank and everything. So this is where having a 24mm wrench to snake it up in there is helpful. I didn't have that, so I used an adjustable wrench. I try to stay away from those things, but you know, I was in a pinch, so I used it. And as long as you're careful, you don't strip the nut, then you're good to go. So adjustable wrench up in there. You have enough room in there to get a wrench in there. However, you're going to have to loosen it up from this side since you can get some leverage. Then after you remove everything, just go ahead and reinstall it. Like I said, I used the jack to push up on my differential to loosen up the tension on these bad boys, and that was enough to be able to swap the OEMs out and the Core 4x4 ones in without having to make any adjustments forward or back. So these are going to stiffen up the rear. Eventually I'll be looking at replacing the upper control arms in the rear, but for now the lower ones look awesome. They're going to give me some rigidity in the back for when the inevitable comes and I start throwing more ponies at the Rebel. We got 30,000 more miles until that happens. All right, I'm going to go ahead and throw some grease inside each of those fittings and then take the truck for a test drive. After a couple miles on the truck, I'm going to come back underneath and retorque everything just for good measure. Anytime I do suspension work, that's always what I do. I'll drive it around and come back and just make sure everything's staying tight and nothing's creaking around in there. But that is the installation of the fixed length lower control arms for the rear of the Ram trucks. If you guys have any questions on the Core 4x4 control arm installation, go ahead, leave them in the comments below or reach out to Core 4x4. I'll put their information in the video description. I appreciate you guys watching. Definitely do me a huge favor and go ahead and hit subscribe. I got a bunch more fun videos coming up with the Ram here, and actually I got a GMC project coming up, so hopefully you guys don't hate me too much for jumping out of the Ram world real quick and then coming back in. So got a few fun projects. Definitely stay in the loop. Hit that subscribe button. Comment below. Let me know what you think. Did these look awesome? Is it time for me to update the upper control arms as well? Let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching.